Hi there, welcome to another video. Today I'm talking with Bailey Tombelli, the director of Satisfaction, and here he is with me. How you doing, Bailey? How you going?
I'm good. Very happy to be here.
Good to see you again. You been well?
Yeah, very well. Very
Nice
well.
one. Nice one. So yeah, I think we're going to talk about Satisfaction today. I love Satisfaction, seen it many, many times. It's had quite a phenomenal festival run, I thought. Maybe for anyone who doesn't know anything about Satisfaction, you could give us a lowdown of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's set in Georgian England, 1792, about a aristocratic woman and her mentor who duel with pistols over a grave insult.
Brilliant, perfect, pithy. I rewatched the film again quite recently, and I was really struck by the quality of the acting. How did you find the actors?
So huge props go to the writer and one of the co-producers, Christopher Buckley, who put forward Chloe Blake, who is our casting director, who's worked a lot with the National Theatre and has been making more moves into films. She was really patient with me and presented me with a great selection of actresses from all different sort of levels of experience. And we looked at a lot of people's reels. I think because we didn't have a huge amount of money, we weren't able to ask people for readings, but we I saw a wide variety of people, and obviously just casting was a huge part of it, and we managed to get a great cast together.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Christopher Buckley there, the writer. The writing of this story is quite distinctive, and it really gives it a sense of time, I think. What were your thoughts when you first read the script and you encountered this Georgian English?
Yeah, I think that the language of the scripts, the dialogue, is one of the things that caught my attention initially. It's really interesting, but it sort of reminds me of. And I have my DP and sometimes co-producer does a lot of like hood movies, and it reminded me of that in a way where they have all this slang, and you kind of like you're sort of not entirely sure what all the words mean, but you kind of catch the drift because of the context, which was really fun and kind of like constantly something that kept you engaged. There was plenty of words I had to look up though, or try to, and it just helps give it a really distinct identity that that I didn't want to become a barrier to their performances. So we tried to just get that stuff down, and we did try some exercises of like putting it in their own words and things like that when we did finally do a rehearsal. But I think it's one of the things that really sort of takes you back and means that part of the film is quite dialogue heavy. That was constantly engaging.
Yeah. And so how prescriptive did you have to be with the dialogue? Because I can't imagine it very easy to improv in ancient tongue, in effect.
Yeah, I would have been. I was happy to potentially change lines and improvise things, but well, like I said, we did try one of those exercises, and it was fun for a little bit, but also kind of sometimes made things more complicated because they were trying to sort of translate while improvising. So yeah, we did stick completely to the scripts. I don't think much of a word of it has changed. There's right at the end of the film, there's a sort of emotional bit that's kind of a torrent of words that definitely had some adjustments in there. But all in aid of the performance. I think the most important thing was to be like focused on the behavior rather than the language, and that was what would hopefully give it some life as opposed to letting it get stilted.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it makes what did the actors struggle with any of this dialogue?
Not really. They seem to kind of launch into it. I think the thing that gave me probably the most anxiety in the lead up to it was Gwyneth Keyworth's character Verity was written to be American, but it's American of 1792. So we're kind of like, well, what does it sound like? How's it going to be? She was also, she's a busy woman. She was in a lot of stuff. She's a BAFTA nominee. She was in BBC series Death Valley, co-leading with Timothy Spall. So she didn't have loads of time to do rehearsals. And I had a video call with her where I probably front loaded a little bit and gave her a lot of context to try and help her, give her shortcuts to kind of navigate to this, but basically didn't hear anything until we did our first rehearsal, or maybe it was even on the day. So that was nerve wracking, but it came together really well.
Well,
Sorry, did I actually answer your question?
you know, you did. No, you absolutely did. But one of the things that that I I haven't. I don't know if this is historically accurate, but as I'm led to understand it, American accents of the 1740s through to the almost the beginning of the 19th century were very close to British accents.
Yeah, I can imagine that they were. I mean, obviously we don't have any sort of recordings to tell, as far as I know. But so it was kind of an estimation, and obviously that helps us out a huge amount. And I thought Gwyneth did an incredible job with the accent, and it's exciting to sort of play around with.
To be honest, like there's something of a fantastical element about the story anyway. Like, and if it wasn't bang on, do we really care? I don't think we do. I think it's part of the charm is that we're taken into this otherworldly Western standoff. And since I brought up Westerns, I'm really interested to talk about some of the references that you might have thought about when making this film. Obviously, there's things you want to say. Oh, this looks like it's come out of a Leone movie. Maybe some of that dialogue stuff. A minute ago you talked about with the dialogue and having to catch up. One of the first things I thought when I saw this was like, A Clockwork Orange. I had to really, this is a made up language. I had to kind of keep up with it. What were the references that kind of brought this film to life?
So yeah, I think as you say, on the Western front, I was not somebody who personally had a huge amount of excitement from the kind of classic English costume drama, the sort of Jane Austen-ness of everything. So I was keen to try to do something different, and that's really, I think, wasn't just a projection from me. That was something that was kind of in the script. Essentially what the script, the attractive part of the script is we're taking something that's classically been seen to be a very male scenario and play it out with women, which wasn't just as some people have called it, like a woke fantasy. It all came from something. Chris found a cartoon about these two women who were purported to duels, and there is some exceptional moments in history when people have done this, and he took some of the names from rumors around that particular incident. So I was excited to kind of lean into that quality of it and try and do something a little bit different. I love trying to sort of put the wrong things together. I think you tend to get interesting mixes that way. So Once Upon a Time in the West is my favorite Sergio Leone movie. Western, probably, it was kind of my gateway into it. So that kind of operatic quality, the idea that we were going to create a very visual approach to suspense, and the end of the film became that, and that was the main part of the development. I think we added around to the duel and tried to stretch it out. It was also something that we borrowed from Barry Lyndon, which does have some great duels, and one near the end that's agonizing because of its mannerism. And I think the more that we went along in the development, that's what I was most focused on, was the idea of having a very mannerist society doing something incredibly brutal. And the kind of the arc of the film is them sort of being dehumanized by these social structures and then discovering their mercy and their humanity in the process. So that was something that I thought about a lot. Days of Heaven was also a film that I thought about in terms of the photography and Andrew Wyeth paintings in general. I'm a big fan of Andrew Wyeth, and Days of Heaven is sort of like the cinematic equivalent. I was thinking a lot about my immediate reaction when I was read this thing that I'm sure that Chris wrote, being like, this would be really simple. It's 4 people in a field, was like, in England, that's complicated. Sun's going in and out and all that kind of stuff. How do we shoot outside in nature and make it something that I liked the look of? For some reason, I always felt like green on digital didn't look always so great. So I was hoping for kind of yellowish fields. We did manage to find some long grass that worked. I don't think I've mentioned this one before, but now I'm thinking of like Amadeus was definitely something that I had in mind. As it's just it's a film that really feels like it's breaking the traditions that we think of with like a historical film, with a period film. It's not caught up in stiltedness. It's a bit wacky. The characters are very big and bold. I don't know if the use of language was as much of a thing there. One thing I did think about in terms of language, which is a bit of a kind of a left field thing, but sort of personal to me. There's a noir drama called The Sweet Smell of Success, and in the development of that, I know from a book, Alexander McKendrick, who was directing a script that was rewritten by Clifford Odets, originally by Ernest Lehman. But Clifford Odets was a playwright initially, and he knew that the director was a bit worried that the language was quite stagey, and he was just like, just get them to just say it as quick as possible, and don't just kind of like almost throw it away and focus on the behavior. So that was something that I really clung to and sort of kept in mind, and was always trying to get that sort of language down by rote, but then be able to throw it away. I mean, it's probably it's completely the wrong term, but the first term I came up with was dirty period, but which was awful. But we just like, we wanted to. Chris rewrote this into something much more eloquent. He was like, we want to rip the corset off of Jane Austen, and show the kind of, I don't know, he's better with words, but like tawdry underbelly of this man in society. And I think that's kind of what we were more trying to do, was show the violence and absurdity underneath this kind of social structure. And yeah.
Makes sense. I think it's. I'm also equally a massive fan of Once Upon a Time in the West, and it's my favorite of Leone's westerns as well. And I think it's deeply ironic that Leone made Once Upon a Time in the West reluctantly, with a view to killing off the western genre. Yet he's given birth to this subversion of the western genre that you've produced, which I think is a lot of fun. Focusing on maybe the aesthetic and then maybe the edit afterwards, if you don't mind. Could you talk a bit about how it was working with your cinematographer and then your editor?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, shooting in exteriors was a big concern for me. Although, to be honest, it basically came up with a simple solution. Like, we just use a trace frame and a bit of negative. So it was quite straightforward. My DP is Simon Stolland, who I'd done a couple of things with at that point, and maybe 3 or 4, and I've done many things with since. And in a way, a lot of the development of the visual approach was kind of left to me. I'm someone who's maybe a bit more steeped in sort of film history and visual approaches. What I was trying to do as much as possible, and has become really important to me, is to think about the kind of color palette of a film overall. So I wanted to have that consistent sort of yellow. Did end up being some green trees in there, but we were going for sort of a warm look that was supposed to counter a bit with the content of the film, and have the characters in quite distinctively bold clothes, and have them mainly in one color. So our main opponent is in pink. Our main lead is in black. One's in blue, and one's in kind of like khaki colors. And so they stand out as almost kind of like cartoon characters. That I love the bold characterization of somebody like the Coen brothers. And that was something I was going for. We also, it seemed like the right film to use a 2:3:9 aspect ratio to go widescreen. And I, particularly at the time, was really into the idea of anamorphics, and I'm really glad that we did use anamorphics on this. We used I think it's the Crystal Express. I think it's not the Cook ones, it's the JDC ones or something. They've been rehoused, but they have some really beautiful kind of aberrations in that, and I think that helped to kind of bring in this idea of it being textured rather than what we were constantly compared to and sort of fighting was the comparison with Bridgerton, and in some ways we'll embrace some of that, but we wanted to show something that felt a bit more gritty and real. So the lenses were a part of that. We added a lot of textured in post, kind of grain to it. And we shot on the Alexa 35, which was new then and supposed to be really kind of great color rendition. So that seemed like an interesting way to go with it. Again, sort of referencing Andrew Wyeth and Days of Heaven for that warm look. Yeah, and then on the day, pre the day, I'd storyboarded everything, so I had a really good idea about how that was all going to work together in the edit and what coverage we needed to get. We got most of that, and it was pretty straightforward. But I'd kind of pre-thought a lot of the blocking, which is somewhat stylized, but I think helps give you that slightly comedic tone that it has. Then in the edit, we basically just we end up cutting like 30 seconds off the beginning of it, which I'm glad that we did. It speeds up the pace of the film at the beginning, and I think things are kind of, you're catching up to more of what's happening. And then the really fun bit was to extend the tension of the duels, and we'd shot with that in mind towards the end of the film, and have that be really kind of just feel really big and operatic. And another huge component of that was Andreas Osa's score. I looked at a lot of different composers and was very glad that he said yes, and we came up with something that was Morricone, Ennio Morricone inspired, but I tried to stay clear of the westerns. There are a bunch of other scores that he's done that I also really like. Some of the ones we referenced were his scores for Nostromo, and there was one that's like the Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, which has this kind of quirky, macabre feel. So he worked with a small group of like 4 musicians who recorded them all separately, and the idea was it should feel like a bit of a kind of a chamber orchestra. We wanted it to feel small and build the tension, but also be quite kind of in your face. And yeah, I think that was all how we built out that edit.
Was it helpful to have the template? I'll ask this differently. I also really appreciate the fact you shot this 2:3:9, because I think with the, not just because of the vistas, but this notion of 2 people at opposing points pointing guns at one another lends itself very much to that. I wondered, when it came to the edit, was it beneficial to have that template of the kind of standoffs you see in westerns to crib from? Because I can't help but think it kind of assisted with the fantasy of the storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the main things that I think of when I think of the spaghetti westerns is their sense of composition, which does come out of American films from the 1940s. Another thing that I liked about the Sweet Smell of Success, and where they'll often use, not get too film geeky about it, but like, sort of deep focus photography that is most famous from Citizen Kane, and where you'd have really strong foreground and background elements. So you have something up here and something up here. Maybe then also kind of something that like Wes Anderson is like abstracted into something that's feels more stylized. So that kind of widescreen frame helps you to have that really strong foreground element and a really strong background element, and have a correlation between them. So yeah, I was very aware of him using those, and it is a really interesting way to kind of build those power dynamics into the composition of the film.
There's no diopters used, split diopters used in this film, is there, though?
No, we didn't. But I think I always wonder how much they actually used them back then. Because sometimes I think they just had deeper focus a lot of the time, because they're not perfectly in focus, and you don't get the funny line that you get in like the Palmer movie. I certainly I don't think they would have had them in Citizen Kane, but I might be wrong. I'm not sure
I think they did. I think they did have. Well, actually,
they did. Okay.
No, hold on. Let me retract. I don't know categorically, because having a pang, like maybe it was an editing trick rather than an optical one.
Right.
But neither of us know. So, so listen, if you could go back to sort of like day one of this project, is there anything you would have done differently?
So going back to the beginning of this project, the thing I would have done differently is probably we waited for a while after we got the initial bit of funding. The project initially came to me through a CenterFrame-funded competition that was it sort of set me up with well, I met a bunch of different script writers who had done 5-page scripts, which was really exciting, and eventually ended up teaming up with Christopher Buckley and Marek Lichtenberg, who was one of the producers, and we put together a pitch deck and were part of this competition, and we managed to get third place, which was really exciting. But we had a sort of quarter of the money that we'd budgeted for the film, and so we were waiting for a while. There was some ideas about how we'd get that money, but it didn't. I guess some of them didn't come off, and eventually, I just kind of chucked some money in, and Chris managed to find some money himself. But and then most of the production ended up being done in about a month. So in some ways, I wish that we hadn't waited quite as long. But it went really well. The shoot itself was a little bit storied. On the way up to, in the lead up to doing the shoot, we got forecasts for bad weather, but British weather, it's kind of always on and off. So we just kind of held fast to our plan because we didn't want to have to move everything. And then it seemed like it was definitely going to have a rain on our second day, so we had to go a bit longer to get what we needed. And then day 2 we ended up having torrential rain and basically only got like 7 shots. And it's good that we got those shots, though some of them are really important. But we maybe should have moved the shoot, and it would have been a bit less stressful.
Thing is, when you look at the final thing, you would never assume there was any compromises based on anything, really. The film feels so very thorough and complete that you've even got really good, very tasteful edit decisions. For example, that moment right towards the end when the final gunshot, and then you cut to the grass or whatever it is, or the wheat or whatever it is. That's a very tasteful thing, and I can't imagine that is cut that way because of a compromise.
Yeah, it's not cut that way because of a compromise. That was a bit of a loose thing. It was probably one of the first times I did that. Actually, no, it's not. I'd done it on a music video before with Simon, where I'd kind of, try and give all the HODs a bit of leeway, and I was like, just shoot some stuff, shoot some cutaways. So he cut a couple of things, and we didn't know exactly where we were going to use them. I thought we might use them at the beginning of the film, but we'd always planned to maybe just cut to Gwyneth with her eyes closed after the gunshot, and us believing that she'd been shot, to only have a reveal at the end. But yeah, that was one of the few things that probably wasn't as planned. And you can also see see raindrops on some of the leaves in one of the shots, but we decided to. No one would be able to tell.
No one would be able to see. No one noticed. I can't say no one noticed, but I've seen the film umpteen times. They've never even noticed. But now I'm going to look out for that.
Definitely.
So yeah, I guess I'd love to hear a bit about your festival run and some of the decisions you made about what your strategy. What was the goal with when you set out with this film?
Yeah, so we were focused. It's a bit of a. I think being honest about the kind of film that we've made, and I knew sort of going into it, what I'd hoped was it might lead to TV production or something like that. It was definitely more of an audience pleaser rather than, tackling the kind of social issues that sometimes festivals want to get behind films that are supporting. So our focus maybe was more on getting being BIFA and BAFTA qualifying, but probably more on the BIFA list. So we made sure that everything that we applied to was on those, was qualifying for those competitions. We also, there was also a couple of festivals I really wanted to apply for that I'd got into previously, like Slam Dance, for example. And that, so yeah, we had good success. We were qualified for both of those things pretty quickly. We opened in Sunderland Short Film Festival, and screened at a bunch of different places. I won't go into listing a whole list of them now. I would say that Bolton was a really great time for the film, and so we had a fairly focused run that started off with a CenterFrame screening for kind of cast and crew type of thing, which was a really lovely, first of all, a great deadline for us to be working to, and a lovely way to kick off the run. And kind of as we were finishing up our run, CenterFrame also put on an industry screening and showed the film then, which has probably been the most useful thing that happened to it. There was a cinema mainly full of producers who, I had some great meetings with afterwards, and has potentially led to some other things.
Listen, so why did you actually choose to distribute the film on CenterFrame's YouTube?
So we decided to put the film on CenterFrame's YouTube because it will help us gain more reach. I mean, festivals are great. There's, it's great to qualify for these things and have a stamp of approval and get a bit of running behind it, and also you meet people at festivals. But you will have a much further reach and get more eyeballs on the film when you put it online. So having it on CenterFrame means that it will go to its community. It will be pushed by the company and various people, and hopefully the people who are affiliated with CenterFrame will see the film.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, working in the film industry can be commercially quite inconsistent, should we say. How does the whole 50-50 revenue share deal with CenterFrame work for you as an indie filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to make money from your film, so it's a great opportunity to be able to do the 50-50 split in revenue from CenterFrame, so we can recoup some of the money that we've spent. As I mentioned before, me and Chris both put money into the film eventually to get it made. So it's a great opportunity to finally make some money back from this thing, as well as the opportunity to share it with more people.
What advice would you give to any new filmmaker making their first film? What would you tell them? What advice would you give to them based on your experience?
Yeah, I think it's great to finally to be asked that question with a specific stage in mind. I think if it's your first film, the most important thing, I mean, first of all, is just keep it simple. It's maybe more than one bit of advice, but try and keep it to one location. Use the means that you have available, and use your community. I think there's too many times where I would have been self-conscious about asking for favors from people or asking people to be involved. That's your superpower, because there's a bunch of other people out here who also are trying to make stuff. Like, ask favors of those people. Another thing that I was talking about a friend with just the other day and was reminded of is you just have to kind of put the train on the tracks. You have to start building it and start going. And then you're asking people for smaller bits. You're not going to somebody and being like, I need thousands of pounds to do this thing. You're like, I just need this house, or I need you for one day, or I need this and that. And people are much more willing to jump on something when it feels like it's going, and you should do your prep and stuff like that, so it looks like an attractive thing for them to get involved in.
I think that's absolutely bang on advice. I've said the same thing to people. I really agree with you. Just start it. Start it, and the momentum of the train going down the hill will pick up pace. Bang on, great advice. And Bailey, tell me, what you're working on next, narratively speaking.
So there's a couple of different things. One of the main focus at the moment is a series that's based on Satisfaction called The Petticoat Duelists, which me and Chris are co-writing, which is a really exciting thing that we're shopping to some producers. We're also going to write a standalone feature version of that, which we hope might kind of be put together sooner. I'm personally writing a psychosexual horror movie about a grieving farmer who commits a carnal act that resurrects his wife, but with some destructively lustful appetites.
I love that. That sounds amazing. Can't wait to hear more about that. You have to send me the script when it's ready.
Yeah, we'll do.
But listen, Bailey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been a really insightful interview. I've always loved Satisfaction. It's, you know, getting involved with it in the early days, I'm really thrilled to see how well it's done on the circuit, what it's done for you and for Buckley and for Marek as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Although I haven't spoken to Marek so much recently, and I need to connect with him. But yeah, great film, really well done, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Guys, if you want to watch Satisfaction, you can find it on CenterFrame's YouTube channel. There's also a blog which goes into a bit more about what I discussed with Bailey here today. So you can find that on the CenterFrame website. And until then, chat to you soon.